The sun had begun its slow descent over the jagged ridges of the western horizon, painting the prairie in shades of gold and burnt sienna. The wind carried the sharp scent of dust and sage, whispering through the tall grasses that swayed like the restless spirits of the land. On the edge of the ranch, a woman stood, her fingers gripping the worn leather of her apron, knuckles white with tension. She was new to solitude, yet far from untested. The divorce had left its mark on her, not in bitterness, but in a quiet wariness, a nervous alertness that clung to her like a second skin. Every creak of the fence, every rustle in the brush, made her heart skip a beat, as if the world itself were conspiring to remind her of the vulnerability she could not shake. Then he appeared. From the shadows of the distant mesas, an Apache stepped into view, tall and lean, with the quiet confidence of someone who moved through life unburdened by the small anxieties that preyed on others. His dark eyes scanned the horizon with the patience of the hunter, yet when they settled on her there was an unmistakable softness, a recognition that seemed to reach past the barriers of culture, of fear, of past heartbreak. "You are small," he murmured, his voice low and steady, carrying across the plain in a way that made the hairs on her arms lift. "But my heart is vast." The words were a gentle shock. She had been prepared for suspicion, for distance, for the polite indifference of a stranger. She had not been ready for intimacy, for the subtle weight of someone seeing her so fully in a single glance. Her fingers loosened on the apron, though not enough to fully release it. Every instinct screamed caution, every rational thought reminded her of the dangers of the world beyond the fence. Yet something in the tilt of his head, the calm of his presence, drew her closer in spite of herself. Around them the prairie seemed to hold its breath. A hawk circled high above, its shadow gliding across the sun-baked soil, and for a moment the world was stripped of distraction. The ranch house behind her was quiet, its timber walls holding memories she had only begun to confront, echoes of arguments, silences, and the lingering ache of love lost. The fields stretched endlessly, offering both freedom and the unknown. She could see the past and the future pressing in on her at the same time, a collision she had never learned to navigate alone. He stepped closer, the soft thud of his boots on the parched earth deliberate, careful. There was no rush, no demand in his movements, only a patience that unsettled her more than any aggression ever could. The sunlight caught the edges of his weathered coat, glinting against the beads of a necklace that seemed almost ceremonial, almost sacred. She wanted to ask questions, to pierce the quiet with her voice, but the words caught in her throat, tangled in the sudden flutter of awareness that she was being seen in a way that few ever truly were. "You are nervous," he said, almost as if reading the unspoken thoughts in her mind. The observation was simple, matter-of-fact, yet carried an understanding that was rare and unwelcome in the society she had left behind. Most people assumed weakness in her nervousness, judged it as hesitation or fear. He did not. He acknowledged it, recognized it, and offered a measure of comfort without encroachment. That distinction unsettled her, as if a stranger could see the real lines beneath her carefully constructed armor. Her heart thumped against her ribs, each beat a question she dared not ask aloud. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of smoke from a distant campfire, the tang of horse sweat, and the faint metallic bite of the afternoon sun. She could hear the subtle stirrings of wildlife, the faint rattle of a branch, the distant clip of hooves that might belong to none or everyone. Every sound became magnified in the silence of the moment between them, each one a reminder of the tension that hummed in the air. The Apache moved with an ease that spoke of long hours under the sun, of nights spent under stars so bright they made the darkness feel less vast. His eyes did not waver, though there was a softness to them now, an unexpected kindness. He extended a hand, not in possession but in offering. The gesture was deliberate, patient, and it carried with it a question that hung in the space between them heavier than any spoken word. She hesitated, torn between the ingrained caution that had kept her safe for years and the sudden, impossible draw of something she could not name. "You do not have to trust me immediately," he said, as if reading the hesitation in her stance. "But know this, not all who come to the land carry harm." The simplicity of the statement was disarming. It did not ask for belief, only recognition, a sliver of acknowledgement that maybe the world held more than the narrow definitions she had grown up with. And yet, even as the words reached her ears, a flicker of fear sparked in the recesses of her mind, fear of misjudgment, of betrayal, of the unknown paths that lay beyond the safety of the fence. She shifted her weight, the rough solace of her boots crunching against the dry soil, and found herself measuring the distance between them not in paces but in possibilities. The ranch had been her refuge, her responsibility, and the only world she had truly known. To let someone cross its boundary, someone who carried with him the unknown, felt like stepping into a storm without a cloak. And still, there was a pull she could not explain, a gravity in his calm presence that made the decision seem less impossible than it should have been. The sun continued its slow fall, long shadows stretching across the prairie like fingers reaching for secrets. She glanced toward the horizon, where mountains rose like silent sentinels, watching over the land with a timeless patience. There were decisions to be made, dangers she had yet to understand, and promises she had not yet considered. And yet, the Apache remained, a quiet figure in the shifting light, offering not answers but the possibility of them, a presence that demanded acknowledgement without coercion. "You are not alone," he said finally, his voice barely louder than the wind. It was not reassurance, not a promise, but a statement of fact, simple and profound. It carried with it the weight of someone who had seen the harshness of the land and the fragility of those who worked it, someone who understood that life's battles were fought not just with guns or horses, but with courage, patience, and the willingness to face uncertainty. She felt a tremor of something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. Her thoughts raced, each one a collision of fear and curiosity, doubt and intrigue. She knew the world beyond the fence could be cruel, that trust was earned in blood and sweat, and that vulnerability could be a weapon as easily as a shield. Yet she also felt the strange, compelling pull of possibility, the chance that this encounter could mark the beginning of something she had not dared to imagine. Something more than survival, more than isolation, more than the quiet monotony of life on the edge of the prairie. The wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of hooves and a faint call from the ridge. Her eyes flicked toward the noise, instinctively measuring the potential threat, but the Apache remained focused on her, patient and unwavering. There was an unspoken understanding, a silent acknowledgement that this was a moment that could not be rushed, that every choice would echo far beyond the present. Her pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from the awareness that life could pivot on such fleeting, fragile intersections. He stepped just a little closer, close enough that the warmth of the sunlit afternoon seemed to mingle with the quiet energy between them. His expression was unreadable in the hard light, yet there was a gentleness that belied the strength of his frame. The contrast unsettled her more than any threat ever could, and she found herself caught between retreat and the impossible pull of connection. The land stretched endlessly around them, vast and untamed, and within that expanse, the first flicker of understanding dawned. Some forces, some people, could not be measured by size or circumstance, only by the depth of heart they carried. "You may think you understand the world," he said, his words deliberate, carrying the cadence of one who had spent years listening to the land, to the wind, to the stories that traveled in silence. "But there are places and there are hearts that no map can show you. You will see them if you allow it." His gaze lingered on hers, steady and unwavering, and for a heartbeat, the entire prairie seemed to hold its breath. She wanted to speak, to ask what he meant, to define the boundaries he hinted at, but the words caught in her throat, trapped by the weight of anticipation and the electric uncertainty that crackled between them. The shadows deepened, the sun dipping behind the far ridges and throwing the ranch into a cooling shade. Night was coming, and with it the unknown. The air shifted, carrying both the promise of protection and the threat of danger, a reminder that the world beyond the fence was as merciless as it was beautiful. She took a tentative step forward, as if testing the pull of his presence, and felt the first tremor of trust or perhaps curiosity stir within her. Yet the question remained, unresolved. Could she allow herself to step into the unknown, to meet the vastness of a heart that had seen more than she could imagine? and to risk what the night might bring? The wind swirled, the grasses bowed, and the prairie seemed alive with silent anticipation. Her breath caught as she met his eyes once more, and in that unspoken exchange the world shifted imperceptibly. One step could change everything. One word could unravel the caution she had clung to. One decision could open a door she had long feared to approach. She was small, yes, but the weight of choice rested squarely in her hands, and in the fading light, the Apache's presence was a quiet challenge, a test of courage and heart. The story of that evening, of that land, of that fragile, electrifying connection, had only just begun, and the prairie waited, patient and eternal, for what would come next. The chill of the coming evening settled over the ranch, brushing against her skin and carrying with it the sharp tang of smoke and dry earth. She could hear the wind shifting through the high grasses, a restless whisper that seemed to echo the unease twisting in her chest. The Apache stood nearby, calm and patient, a living contradiction to the tension that pulsed through her every limb. She wanted to study him more, to see if there was a flaw, a hesitation, a hint of what drove him across the open plains to stand at her fence. But the truth was, there was nothing obvious, nothing that could prepare her for the depth of quiet confidence in his gaze. Her thoughts drifted to the days before her life had narrowed to this stretch of land. She had been married once, briefly, and that failure had left a scar she could neither hide nor explain. The ranch had become her fortress, her world, her responsibility. Every sunrise, every routine task had been a measure of control she clung to when everything else seemed uncertain. And yet, here he was, a man from a world she had only glimpsed in stories and fleeting encounters, a man who carried the land's history in his stance, in the steady rhythm of his breath. He did not rush her, he did not demand her trust. He simply existed, a reminder that the world extended far beyond the fences she had built around herself. She remembered the first time she had seen him, weeks before, as he had emerged from the brush near the river that cut through the southern edge of the property. He had been tending to something there, a task she could not identify, yet it had carried an air of solemnity, a purpose she could not question. Her curiosity had nearly led her to call out, but instinct had held her tongue, caution drilled into her through years of solitude and disappointment. She had watched from a distance, the way he moved with reverence, his fingers brushing over rocks and soil as if reading the stories etched into them. Something about the way he moved had unsettled her, and yet fascinated her in equal measure. The Apache's presence was not just a curiosity. It was a reminder of the world she had largely ignored. She had grown up on tales of conflict, of the uneasy coexistence between settlers and tribes, of skirmishes over land and honor. Those stories had been distant warnings, not realities she believed she would ever confront. And yet, every detail of his posture, the way he surveyed the horizon, the faint rhythm of a chant she could not understand, hinted at a life intertwined with danger and wisdom alike. He carried history in the lines of his face and in the way the wind seemed to bend around him. Night began to claim the sky, deepening the shadows that pooled between the rolling hills. The air cooled, carrying with it the distant sound of a coyote's call and the faint rumble of hooves along a far-off trail. She glanced back toward the ranch, the timber-bird walls dark against the fading light. Inside, the rooms were empty echoes of the life she had once shared, spaces that had absorbed every word of anger, every whispered hope. She realized suddenly that she had been living among ghosts, and now there was something real before her, something tangible that challenged her caution without demanding surrender. The Apache's eyes shifted to the west, where the mountains clawed at the sky with jagged peaks. "The land speaks," he said softly, almost to himself. "It carries the memory of those who walked before, the burdens of those who remain, and the promise of what is yet to come." His words were strange, but they stirred something deep inside her, a sense that this land, which had felt so limiting, was far larger than she had allowed herself to see. And perhaps so was she. Her gaze fell to her hands, calloused from work, yet trembling now with unbidden anticipation. She thought of her father, the man who had built this ranch from little more than stubborn determination and a stubborn love for the soil. He had taught her how to measure risk, how to protect what mattered, how to read the land as if it were a living creature. Yet, despite all his lessons, she realized she had never learned how to read people like him, strangers who could appear out of nowhere and unsettle everything she had held sacred. The sound of distant thunder rolled across the plains, a low and warning growl that spoke of storms yet to come. She could feel the tension in the air, the way the wind shifted in response, carrying scents and sounds she had not noticed before. Even the horses in the paddocks were restless, stamping the earth and flicking their ears toward the horizon. Something was moving, something beyond the ordinary rhythms of ranch life, and her instincts screamed for attention. The Apache noticed it too, his stance alert despite his calm demeanor. "You feel it," he said, his voice barely louder than the wind. There was no accusation in the words, only observation. She nodded, unable to find speech. The unease had a shape, a weight that pressed against the edges of the night. There were stories, she realized, that even the wind carried, the stories of travelers lost, of danger that could strike without warning, of choices that would leave marks far beyond the surface of skin or soil. He stepped closer, as she could see the lines of muscle beneath his coat, the way his hands had learned both gentleness and strength. "You have lived cautiously," he said, almost a statement to the night rather than to her. "And that caution has served you well. But the land teaches in ways that caution alone cannot prepare you for?" His gaze returned to hers, steady and unyielding. There was a gravity in it, the kind that made the world feel simultaneously vast and intimate. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and something she did not dare name. Memories of her past life flickered through her mind, nights spent alone in the lantern-lit kitchen, the quiet despair that had followed the divorce, the lonely hours walking the perimeter of the ranch while the stars wheeled overhead. She had grown accustomed to silence, to solitude, to the carefully measured rhythms of survival. Yet now, she realized, there was a current under the surface of her life, a force that had been waiting for the right moment to surface. And that force was here, standing before her with calm eyes and a presence that refused to be ignored. The Apache moved again, his boots stirring the dry grass, leaving traces in the earth that seemed almost deliberate. He spoke again, a whisper carried on the wind. "The past is a weight, but it can also be a guide. You will see its lessons if you are willing to look." There was no preaching in his tone, only an observation that unsettled her more than any threat could. She wanted to ask what he meant, to demand clarity, but her voice faltered. The words, like so many others, seemed inadequate to capture the shifting landscape of tension, curiosity, and recognition between them. The moon began to rise, pale and sharp against the deepening blue of night. Shadows stretched long across the prairie, wrapping the ranch and its keeper in a blanket of darkness that felt both protective and threatening. She felt the brush of wind against her cheek and smelled the faint trace of smoke from a distant fire, a reminder that the world extended far beyond the boundaries she had trusted. Every instinct screamed caution, yet another voice whispered possibility, daring her to consider that perhaps life could be more than she had allowed herself to believe. He looked at her with an intensity that made her stomach tighten. "The world is larger than your fears," he said. "And hearts are larger than the limits you place upon them." She wanted to respond, to challenge him, to assert the caution that had carried her this far, yet the weight of his presence made her reconsider. Perhaps it was not defiance he demanded, but attention. Perhaps it was not surrender he sought, but recognition. The air shifted again, carrying a sense of motion far across the plains. The faint sound of distant hooves, the rustle of grass where something had passed unseen. Her senses sharpened instinctively, a lesson from years alone on the land, but she felt it differently now. With him, the danger did not seem immediate, yet the threat hung in the night like a shadow she could not fully trace. There was movement, yes, but it was more than that. It was the anticipation of events she could not yet see, a story beginning before her eyes, carried by the wind and by the presence of the man who had appeared on her land. She took a careful step backward, testing the space between them, measuring the distance she was willing to allow. The Apache did not move, did not press, did not demand. He simply observed, his dark eyes reflecting the silver light of the rising moon. In that quiet she felt a strange tension coil inside her, a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something dangerously like hope. She knew that she would have to make choices soon, that the land and the night and the stranger, before her demanded attention she had never granted to anyone before. The prairie seemed to listen, holding its breath as if aware that a story larger than either of them had begun. The wind carried whispers through the grasses, rustling the fence posts, tugging at the fringes of her clothing. The distant call of a coyote was answered by another, closer this time, the sound sharp and deliberate. The Apache shifted slightly, his gaze sweeping across the horizon, and she realized that he was aware of every detail she had overlooked. There was a wisdom in him, honed by life under an open sky, tempered by solitude and struggle. "You have much to protect," he said, his voice low and steady. "But there are also things to discover, things that will challenge the boundaries of what you believe is possible." She felt the weight of his words settle in her chest, pressing against her ribs, tugging at the caution that had been her constant companion. The choice he hinted at was unspoken, yet unavoidable: to remain within the narrow circle of safety she had built, or to step toward the unknown with a heart she did not yet trust. The night grew colder and the shadows deepened, stretching across the ranch and the endless fields beyond. The tension between them was a living thing, pulsing in the quiet, marked by small movements, shifting glances, and the unspoken awareness that everything could change with the next step, the next word, the next decision. She felt the pull of curiosity, the weight of history, the subtle thrill of something that could not be named. And she knew that the hours ahead would demand more than courage. They would demand honesty, instinct, and the willingness to face the unknown without retreat. The Apache finally broke the silence, his voice carrying across the night with measured cadence. "There are stories here, hidden in the land, waiting to be understood. And some of them may require you to see beyond what is safe, beyond what is familiar. Are you willing to do that?" Her heart quickened, the question piercing through every layer of caution she had built. She could not answer yet, could not even form the words, but she knew that the moment had arrived when life would demand more than she had ever given it. And as the moon rose high over the prairie, casting a pale glow on the fence and the stretch of earth beyond, the ranch felt both small and vast, as if the land itself held its breath in anticipation. The night carried the weight of secrets, of history, of paths yet to be chosen, and in that quiet, she realized that her life, her solitude, and her heart were about to be tested in ways she could not foresee. The Apache remained, a figure of patience and strength, waiting for her to step into the story that had already begun, leaving the prairie, the house, and the evening suspended in a tension that would not be resolved until courage and curiosity met beneath the rising moon. The night deepened, settling over the ranch like a velvet cloak, yet the prairie beyond remained restless. Shadows moved in ways that were not entirely natural, and the wind carried hints of far-off disturbance. She could feel it in her bones, that uneasy rhythm that had always warned her before trouble arrived. Her fingers clutched the edge of the fence, knuckles white as she scanned the horizon. The Apache's presence beside her was both grounding and disquieting. He seemed to read the land in ways she had never learned, each pause, each glance, telling stories she could only guess at. He turned toward her, the faint moonlight tracing the lines of his face, shadows and light mingling as though they were both part of some silent pact with the night. "The land holds more than you know," he said. "There are forces here that do not speak in words, that do not announce themselves. And some are drawn to what is vulnerable, what is protected, what is unguarded." His eyes met hers, steady and dark, carrying the weight of unspoken experience. She understood immediately that this was not a casual observation. He was warning her, hinting at dangers that could not be ignored, dangers she could not fully comprehend yet. Her thoughts went back to the years of solitude she had endured, the days spent defending the ranch from threats small and large, human and animal. She had learned the rhythms of the land, the signs of approaching storms, the distant sound of hooves that did not belong. And yet, this felt different. This was a presence beyond ordinary caution, beyond her careful routines, a disturbance that carried both possibility and peril. Her pulse quickened as she realized that the moment she had feared might come the intrusion of something or someone beyond her control had arrived. The Apache raised a hand, tilting his head toward the ridge where the moonlight fell unevenly across rocks and scrub. "Do you see?" he asked. She followed his gaze, eyes straining to discern any movement. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but stillness, the quiet whisper of grasses and distant stars. Then, faint against the soil, a shimmer, like heat off a desert road, shifted and moved in ways that did not belong to natural wind or wildlife. She stiffened, heart hammering, realizing she was witnessing something that demanded attention, something beyond ordinary danger. "It is approaching," he said, his voice calm but deliberate. "It is neither human nor fully animal. You must be ready." She swallowed hard, the words registering in fragments of fear and disbelief. She wanted to argue, to tell him that she had managed the ranch alone for years, that she was capable of protecting herself. But the tension in his posture, the certainty in his voice, made any such argument hollow. Her instincts screamed at her to take action, yet she felt trapped between the urge to flee and the necessity of standing still, of observing and understanding before she acted. Her mind flicked to the house, to the fragile sense of safety the timber-board walls had always provided. Inside were reminders of a life she had tried to leave behind, old photographs, letters she had never destroyed, the lingering echo of conversations and disputes that now seemed small compared to the scale of what awaited beyond the fence. She knew the ranch could provide some shelter, some advantage, yet the openness of the prairie offered no cover, no easy path to defense. Every choice carried risk, and the Apache's presence reminded her that risk could also bring opportunity she had never dared to pursue. He shifted closer, not in threat but in silent assurance. "Do not mistake fear for weakness," he said. "It is the mind's way of preparing the body, the heart's way of reminding you that life matters. You will need both in the moments ahead." Her breath caught at the words. They were simple, yet the depth of understanding behind them stirred something she had long ignored, the possibility that fear could be a guide, not just a barrier. She realized that she had spent years running from moments like this, defining courage narrowly as survival. Now she saw it as something larger, something that encompassed instinct, intuition, and the willingness to confront what could not be fully understood. The shimmer on the ridge shifted again, closer now, and she saw the outline more clearly. It was not entirely animal, nor entirely human. Its movements were deliberate but alien, a fluidity that made her stomach twist. She could hear the faintest rasp, a whisper carried on the wind, something almost like words yet not. The ranch had been her world, her domain, yet she understood with sudden clarity that her control was incomplete, that life could intrude on her boundaries in ways she had never anticipated. He studied her, reading the unspoken questions in her posture. "It is drawn to what is unguarded," he said again. "Not because you are weak, but because the land itself calls it, because the world beyond the fence has ways of testing those who seek to protect what they love." She nodded slowly, the weight of his words settling like stones in her chest. He was not just warning her. He was teaching her to observe, to anticipate, to read the currents of tension that moved invisibly across the plains. She realized that survival alone would not be enough. She would need understanding, instinct, and perhaps an unexpected ally in him. Her thoughts drifted to the past, to the memory of her father teaching her how to gauge the wind, to read the subtle signs of approaching danger, to trust her senses even when the mind doubted them. Those lessons had kept her alive, had allowed her to maintain the ranch despite loneliness and conflict. Yet this moment was different, beyond anything she had encountered before. The rules of survival seemed inadequate, and she felt the creeping realization that she would have to adapt quickly or be overwhelmed. The Apache stepped forward, boots stirring the dust, leaving faint imprints in the moonlit soil. "We cannot wait," he said. "What comes will not pause for hesitation." There was no panic in his tone, only the calm acceptance of necessity. She felt a spark of something she had not allowed herself to feel in years, trust, however fragile, that he could guide her through what was coming. Yet, even as the thought settled, another crept in. The unknown was not limited to danger alone. There were stories here, histories hidden in the soil and the wind, that could reshape everything she believed about the land and her place upon it. Her eyes returned to the shimmer, which now carried a faint glow, almost imperceptible yet undeniable. The movement was deliberate, cautious, yet there was intelligence in it, a purpose she could not define. She felt her pulse tighten, the air thick with anticipation. Every instinct screamed to retreat, yet she knew that standing still, observing, was the only way to prepare for what might follow. The Apache's presence beside her offered a measure of reassurance, but it also made the unknown more vivid, more immediate, more impossible to ignore. "You have faced hardship before," he said quietly. "You have felt loss, and you have rebuilt. This is different, but you will carry the same strength forward. Remember that the mind and heart together guide more than either alone." His words lingered in the night, a rhythm that matched the beat of her own pulse. She wanted to respond, to say something, anything, yet the words faltered, caught between fear, awe, and the pull of curiosity. She realized that the tension was not just about the approaching threat, but also about the choices she had yet to make, the boundaries she had yet to test, the courage she had yet to claim. The wind shifted again, carrying the faint sound of hooves much closer this time, and with them came a low murmur, almost like the whisper of voices in the distance. She froze, heart racing, sensing the convergence of multiple forces, the land itself, the unknown entity on the ridge, and the presence of the Apache beside her. Each element demanded attention, each held a fragment of a larger puzzle she could not yet see. She realized with sudden clarity that the night was only the beginning, that what came next would test her in ways beyond physical endurance, that every decision would echo in ways she could not yet imagine. He placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, steadying her without intrusion. "The night teaches patience," he said, "but it also demands action. We will need both soon." She felt the warmth of his hand, and for a moment the rest of the world faded, leaving only the tension of expectation, the weight of unseen forces, and the faint glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could face what was coming together. Her mind raced with possibilities. The ranch, her father's legacy, the entity moving in the night, the strange connection she felt with the Apache. Everything seemed to converge in this moment, each fragment of her past and present colliding with the unknown that approached. She realized that she could not retreat further into caution, nor could she afford to act without thought. The balance between fear and action, instinct and reason, would determine the outcome of the night, and perhaps more than the night alone. The shimmer on the ridge moved again, closer now, revealing faint shapes that suggested intelligence, awareness, strategy. She held her breath, feeling every muscle tense, every sense alert. The wind carried the scent of sage, of dust, and something else she could not name, a faint metallic tang that hinted at danger and mystery. She knew that the ranch would never feel the same again, that the world beyond the fences she had trusted was wider, stranger, and more perilous than she had ever imagined. The Apache's voice broke the silence again, low and measured. "Do not fear what you do not yet understand, but do not mistake understanding for control. The land and its stories move on their own course, and we must move with them, not against them." She nodded, though the weight of anticipation pressed heavily against her chest. Every instinct demanded preparation, yet the heart whispered that this was not just survival, it was a test of courage, judgment, and the limits of trust. As the entity drew nearer, the prairie seemed to lean in, holding its breath. The ranch house stood silent behind them, a fragile haven against the night, while the shadows stretched long and thin across the ground. The approaching presence was no longer distant, and the tension that had simmered beneath the moonlit sky rose to a palpable edge. She felt the weight of choice, of consequence, pressing down like the wind before a storm. And in the stillness, the Apache's hand remained at her shoulder, steady and unyielding, a promise without words that they would face the unknown together. The night had only begun, and already it demanded vigilance, courage, and the willingness to step beyond what had been safe. The prairie whispered of history, of danger, of possibilities yet unseen, and she knew with a certainty that left her breathless. The story of the ranch, the night, and the man beside her was far from simple. Every shadow carried a secret, every movement a hint, every sound a warning. And as the wind rose, carrying whispers across the land, she understood that the night would test her more than any day she had ever known, leaving the outcome uncertain, the tension unresolved, and the stakes higher than she could yet measure. The prairie had gone completely dark now, the moon a pale, watchful eye hanging over the ridges. The air had grown heavy, carrying the scent of dry earth, sage, and something metallic faintly beneath it, sharp enough to make her stomach tighten. Every sound seemed amplified: the scrape of a branch against a fence post, the whisper of grass under the wind, the distant, almost inaudible rattle of hooves, or was it footsteps? Her heart raced, and though she tried to steady her breath, it came in uneven gusts. Beside her, the Apache remained calm, his eyes scanning the shadows with the precision of someone who had spent a lifetime reading the land, as if it spoke in a language only he could fully understand. "You feel it, don't you?" he asked softly, and she nodded, though the motion felt heavy in the darkness. He didn't press, didn't demand answers. He simply observed her, a silent anchor in the storm of her nerves. The prairie seemed to shift under the tension between them, alive with invisible energy. Something was coming, she knew, something that would test her in ways she had never imagined. Her father's lessons, the years she had spent defending the ranch alone, even her cautious nature, all of it felt suddenly small against what was approaching from the shadows. She swallowed hard and let her gaze drift toward the ridge, toward the faint glimmer she had been tracking all night. It pulsed now like a heartbeat, subtle but unmistakable. There was intelligence in the movement, awareness, a rhythm that was deliberate, almost mocking. She clenched her fists, nails biting into palms as she tried to measure the threat. The Apache noticed her tension, and without touching her, his presence was grounding. "You are not alone," he murmured, repeating words that had already etched themselves deep into her mind. "Whatever comes, it will not find you without witnesses." A low hum rose from the ridge, a sound she could not place but that reverberated in her chest, vibrating through the ground beneath her boots. Her eyes darted around, catching movement in the distant trees, in the shadows near the fence line, in the black outline of the fields beyond. Every instinct screamed danger, yet the rational part of her wondered if the world had ever been this still before a storm. If the tension of anticipation could be a weapon as potent as the threat itself. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the ridge, larger than she expected, its movement precise, purposeful. It slithered over the uneven ground, disappearing into a fold of shadow near the far edge of the pasture. Her pulse jumped, and she felt the first flicker of true panic. The Apache, however, remained unmoving. He tilted his head slightly, listening, and then whispered, "It tests before it strikes. It seeks to understand you as much as you seek to understand it." Her mind raced, memories of isolation colliding with the immediacy of this threat. She thought of the quiet nights when she had walked the fences alone, the months of tending the ranch with no company beyond the horses and her own reflection. She had learned to trust instinct, to read small signals, to act decisively when necessary. Yet this presence, intelligent and unknown, moving through the night toward her land, demanded something more than instinct. It demanded courage she wasn't sure she possessed, not alone. A sudden cry pierced the silence, sharp and urgent, echoing across the prairie. She stumbled back instinctively, heart hammering, and the Apache's hand shot out, steadying her before she fell. The sound was close now, a warning, perhaps a challenge. She could see the faint glow of the entity now, closer than before, a shimmer of movement that defied natural shape. The wind shifted again, carrying the faintest metallic tang and the rustle of disturbed grasses. Her breath came faster, shallow, as adrenaline coursed through her veins. "You must trust yourself," the Apache said, his voice a quiet command. He moved forward then, fluid and deliberate, and she followed, every step heavy with tension. The ridge seemed impossibly distant, yet the entity had grown bolder, its presence now unmistakable against the backdrop of moonlight. Every shadow felt alive, every sound a potential threat. She realized that the land she had always trusted was no longer predictable, and that survival might demand more than skill with tools or knowledge of the terrain. It would demand an understanding of forces she could not yet name. A sudden rustling came from the trees along the fence, and she froze, hand gripping the hilt of the old knife her father had left her. She had never needed it beyond small predators before, yet tonight it felt like a lifeline, a tangible connection to control in the face of the unknown. The Apache shifted beside her, a shadow moving with grace and certainty. "It tests your courage," he said. "Fear is only a signal. Do not confuse it for defeat." Another movement, closer this time, sent a shiver down her spine. The entity's shape was now partially visible, limbs moving with a fluidity she could not comprehend, glowing faintly as if lit from within. Her heart raced, muscles coiled, ready to react, yet she felt the pull of his presence beside her, an unspoken assurance that she was not facing this alone. She realized suddenly that the night was a crucible, a test not only of skill and instinct, but of trust and understanding. Every choice, every heartbeat could tip the balance between survival and disaster. She thought of the stories her father had told her, not just of battles fought with men, but of respect earned from forces beyond human understanding, of listening to the land, of recognizing danger before it arrived. That knowledge, once abstract and distant, felt vital now, guiding her gaze and sharpening her instincts. She began to see patterns in the movement of the entity, subtle shifts in the grasses and shadows that revealed more than she could fully articulate. And yet, the closer it came, the more uncertain she felt. How could instinct alone prepare her for something that seemed neither human nor animal, something alive with intent and mystery? The Apache moved forward, hand extended toward the ridge, signaling her to follow. She obeyed, each step measured, her senses stretched to their limits. The moonlight revealed glimpses of the shimmer, hints of shape and movement that teased her imagination, feeding both fear and fascination. She could hear the hum growing louder now, a vibration that thrummed in the air and resonated in her chest. The night had become a living thing, tense, watching, waiting, and she realized that whatever unfolded next would not be simply a confrontation, it would be a reckoning of courage, awareness, and trust. Suddenly, the entity surged forward, faster than she expected, and her heart leaped. She stumbled, and the Apache caught her arm, steadying her in an instant. "Do not lose yourself to panic," he commanded, voice sharp yet calm. "Act, but do not react blindly. Observe, anticipate, and move with purpose." His words struck her with clarity, anchoring her as adrenaline threatened to overtake reason. She drew in a deep breath, centering herself, feeling the land beneath her feet, the weight of the moon above, the energy of the unknown pressing in. The shimmer halted momentarily, as if assessing them, and she felt a strange sense of communication, a pulse of awareness that transcended words. It was no longer simply a threat. It was a force and intelligence gauging her, challenging her. Her mind raced through strategies, memories of past survival training, instincts honed by years on the ranch. Every option seemed limited, every move critical. She realized that tonight would demand more than instinct or experience. It would demand courage beyond the ordinary, a willingness to confront not just the unknown, but her own fears and limitations. The wind whipped across the prairie, carrying a sudden chill, and with it the scent of smoke and distant fire. The entity shimmered again, its form clearer now, glowing faintly in the moonlight. She could see its eyes, or what felt like eyes, watching her, studying her movements, testing her readiness. The tension in the air was almost unbearable, every nerve in her body attuned to the presence that had crossed the boundaries of her ranch, her life, and her understanding of the world. Beside her, the Apache remained calm, a solid anchor in the storm of anticipation. "You are ready," he whispered, as she blinked, caught between disbelief and determination. "Your courage, your heart, they are needed. Now, do not hesitate." She felt the weight of the night pressing down, the vastness of the prairie both liberating and terrifying, and the hum of the entity thrummed through her, a living rhythm she could not yet interpret fully. She raised her head, meeting the glow of its presence with a mixture of fear, awe, and determination. The night held its breath, the air charged, and she realized that the next moments would define not only survival, but who she could become in the face of the unknown. A sudden burst of movement, closer now, sent her pulse racing. The entity's form pulsed with energy, intelligent, deliberate, aware. She felt the pull of instinct, the lessons of years alone on the land, and the subtle guidance of the man beside her. The tension between fear and courage, between hesitation and action, had reached a breaking point. She knew that the night would demand every ounce of resolve she possessed, that the confrontation was imminent, and that whatever happened next could shift the balance of the ranch, the land, and the fragile hope stirring within her heart. The Apache stepped slightly ahead, signaling her to trust him, to follow his lead even as the shimmer edged closer. Her breath caught, every muscle coiled, senses sharp. The prairie seemed suspended in anticipation, the darkness alive with the rhythm of what was coming. She felt the surge of adrenaline, the weight of fear, and the flicker of something stronger, courage, determination, and the recognition that she was not entirely alone. The night was poised on a knife's edge, the entity closing in, the tension reaching its peak, and she knew with certainty that the story of this evening, this land, and the connection forming between her and the man beside her was approaching the climax, a moment where choices, courage, and heart would collide under the watchful eye of the moon. The prairie held its breath as the shimmer reached the edge of the ridge, the glow now bright against the silver moonlight. She stood rigid, feeling the tension coil through every muscle, but the Apache's presence beside her steadied the storm in her chest. His hand brushed hers briefly, a grounding touch, unspoken and firm, and she drew a deep, shuddering breath, forcing her mind to focus. The entity paused, its pulsing form quivering as if sensing the courage and resolve in her, a silent acknowledgement of her readiness. Then, slowly, the light began to shift, folding in on itself, shrinking until it resolved into something recognizable. A horse strange in color, almost luminous under the moon stood before them. Its eyes reflected an intelligence that went beyond instinct, but it radiated no malice. Her muscles relaxed slightly, the tension ebbing as she realized that the threat she had anticipated had been misunderstood. It was a test of presence, awareness, and courage. The fear that had driven her through the night now gave way to wonder and cautious relief. The Apache moved closer to the animal, his hands gentle, coaxing without force. "It is not what it seemed," he murmured. "The land has ways of revealing what we carry inside, fear, hope, trust." She watched as the horse lowered its head, seeming to accept him, and the glow faded into the quiet black of its coat, natural and strong. Her heart slowed, yet it still raced with the residue of adrenaline, the lingering sense of a night that had tested every fiber of her being. "You see?" he asked, turning toward her. "The land, the night, the unknown, they do not act against you unless you allow fear to guide your choices. Courage, clarity, and presence are your shields." She nodded slowly, feeling the weight of his words sink in. For the first time in years, she felt not only the rush of survival, but the quiet power of understanding, the connection between herself, the land, and the forces that shaped it. She realized that she had underestimated herself, and perhaps underestimated the world's capacity to reflect what was within her. The horse shifted, stepping closer to her, and instinctively she reached out, brushing a hand along its mane. It was warm, solid, real. She felt a shiver of awe and relief run through her. The night, once a canvas of fear, had become a teacher. She thought of her father's lessons, the years of tending fences, feeding livestock, and walking the land alone. Each act of care had prepared her not just for survival, but for understanding, for recognizing signals, for trusting herself. And she realized now that she had been ready all along, ready to meet the unknown, to act with courage, to embrace a life larger than the limits she had imposed. The Apache gave her a small nod, his eyes reflecting both pride and quiet satisfaction. "You carried yourself through the night with strength," he said. "That strength does not come from solitude alone, but from the willingness to face what cannot be seen and trust what is real." She felt the heat of gratitude and something deeper stir within her, a recognition that this partnership, however brief or unlikely, had altered the path of her life. The fear that had seemed insurmountable had passed, replaced by clarity and a newfound sense of agency. The wind shifted again, gentler this time, carrying the scents of sage and dry earth without the tension of imminent danger. The horizon revealed the faint outlines of the mountains she had only glimpsed in daylight, their forms comforting rather than threatening. Her gaze drifted back to the ranch house, the structure now bathed in soft moonlight, the windows reflecting the calm she felt settling in her chest. The house, her home, the center of a life she had fought to protect, no longer felt confining but reassuring, a testament to what she had endured and what she could still accomplish. The horse nuzzled her shoulder gently, a simple act that carried immense weight, and she laughed softly, a sound she had not allowed herself in months. Relief and joy intertwined with the lingering echo of fear, creating a resonance that made the night feel alive in a new way. The Apache smiled faintly, a quiet acknowledgement that the night's trials had reached their turning point. "You're stronger than you know," he said, voice low and steady. "And the land recognizes that strength just as it recognizes those who fear it." She stepped back, taking in the breath of the prairie and the quiet stillness that had returned. Her heart, once so burdened by the weight of solitude and past failures, felt lighter, unchained. She realized that courage was not simply the absence of fear, but the act of moving through it with purpose, clarity, and trust. The tests of the night had been harsh, but they had revealed capacities she had not acknowledged, both in herself and in the world around her. The Apache turned his gaze toward the distant ridge, where the first hints of dawn were brushing the sky with pale light. "The night always passes," he said softly. "And when it does, those who have endured it see more clearly. Remember this, your choices, your presence, your heart, they shape more than your immediate world. They echo beyond what you can see." She nodded, feeling the weight of the statement settle into her mind, understanding that the lessons of the night would carry into every sunrise, every decision, and every moment she faced beyond this prairie. A crow called in the distance, the first living sound of morning. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease, the residual adrenaline of fear fading into anticipation and calm. The horse stepped back toward the ridge, no longer threatening, no longer otherworldly, merely another part of the land she had come to respect and understand. She realized that the night had been a mirror, reflecting both her fears and her strength, revealing the boundaries she had imposed on herself, and showing the vastness she had yet to claim. The Apache's hand remained briefly at her shoulder, a grounding reminder of presence, of partnership. "Do not forget," he said, "that courage is not born in comfort. It grows in the spaces where fear and uncertainty meet the heart. You have met that challenge tonight." She felt the truth in his words, the way they resonated with years of quiet struggle and self-reliance. The night had demanded her courage, and she had met it, not perfectly, not without fear, but with honesty and resolve. She glanced back at the ranch house again, windows glowing softly in the first light of morning. She thought of the work ahead, of fences to mend, animals to tend, and routines to re-establish, yet she felt a subtle shift within herself. The same land that had once felt confining now felt expansive, full of possibility. She had faced the unknown and emerged not just unbroken, but stronger, more attuned to the rhythms of the world around her, more aware of her capacity to act with courage and clarity. The Apache mounted his horse, the animal shifting beneath him with ease. He looked back at her one final time, his expression unreadable but filled with a quiet intensity. "The land will test you again," he said. "But tonight you have proven that you are ready for what comes." And with that, he turned, riding toward the horizon. Leaving her on the ridge, facing the dawn and the vast prairie, a woman transformed by fear, courage, and understanding. She stood for a long moment, watching him disappear into the pale morning light, and felt a surge of emotion she could not name. Gratitude, relief, hope, and a quiet thrill of independence all mingled within her, leaving her breathless and smiling. The prairie, once a place of isolation and caution, now stretched before her as a landscape of possibility. She had survived the night, yes, but more importantly, she had learned to trust herself, to face fear with clarity, and to recognize the guidance and support offered without compromise or expectation. As the sun crested the horizon, spilling gold across the fields, she felt the warmth on her face and the gentle rustle of grasses in the breeze. Every detail of the night, the shimmer, the test, the tension replayed in her mind, but the memory no longer carried the weight of fear. Instead, it was a testament, a marker of what she could endure, of the lessons she had learned, and of the courage she could summon when the unknown pressed close. She realized that life, much like the prairie, would always contain shadows and tests, but the capacity to meet them had grown within her. She turned toward the ranch, feeling the pull of home, the steady promise of routine and labor and care. And yet, she carried with her something larger now, a sense that the land, the night, and the strange forces she had faced were not threats alone, they were teachers, guides, and mirrors of her own heart. Courage, trust, and presence had proven their worth, and she felt ready to meet whatever lay ahead with clarity and resolve. The day began in quiet splendor, the prairie alive with light and sound. And she knew that this dawn was not just another sunrise, it was the beginning of a new chapter, one shaped by courage and understanding, one that left fear behind but carried lessons forward. She felt the land beneath her feet, steady and alive, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future unbounded by caution, shaped by choice, resilience, and the vastness of a heart she had only begun to recognize. She smiled, a full, unrestrained smile, and whispered to herself, "I am ready." The ranch, the prairie, and the life she had fought to protect stretched before her, full of possibility and promise. And she knew that the night had not been the end, it had been the beginning of everything she was capable of becoming. The wind carried the faint echo of hooves in the distance, a reminder that the world beyond the fence would always exist, and that challenges and mysteries would continue to arrive. But she no longer feared them. She faced them with courage, presence, and a heart that had grown larger in ways she had never imagined. The Apache was gone, but his lessons lingered, woven into her understanding of the land, the night, and herself. And as she stepped forward toward the ranch, toward the light of day and the work that awaited, she felt a sense of completeness, a quiet joy, and the deep knowledge that she was capable of meeting whatever the world might bring. For in the night she had discovered that fear could be met, that courage could be claimed, and that the heart, vast and unyielding, could guide her through the darkness and into the dawn. And with that realization, the prairie, the ranch, and her own life stretched wide, full of hope, resilience, and the promise of a future shaped by strength, choice, and the enduring power of a heart that would never shrink again.